Hello, Andrew here. Welcome to Lecture 3 of the Designing Digital Content in Youth Work module. This lecture is going to be divided in half. I'm just going to have like an outline of theory stuff in relation to project design in a youth work setting. And then the other half will be a practical where we begin to make posters and start to kind of, put a lot of these ideas to use in terms of matching the technical skills with what you would already know as youth workers in terms of best practice. I'm sure a lot of what I'm about to kind of cover you've gone elsewhere, where you've discussed elsewhere in terms of theoretical models for youth work in particular. So I'm not going to labor on too much. I'm just going to pick a few examples. In the next lecture, we'll kind of get a little bit further under the bonnet of that. But for now, I just want to kind of paint a quick picture of where digital youth work might fit within kind of more traditional models of youth work, all with a view to leading towards, a best practice sort of planning and designing towards doing situation for youth work projects in digital media. It's a really good reference point, and I'm going to reference it between this lecture and the next one, is the Centre for Effective Services Ideas in Action, theory to practice research work. It was designed to support the Irish NQSF National Quality Standards Framework to achieve kind of commonality and compatibility between youth work provision, and then it also in more in depth towards like core principles mostly related to that framework for Ireland. So aside from that particularism with Ireland, it is a really interesting and useful international resource where it cites best practice and theory in terms of how youth work can and should be negotiated. And to that end, it's they have a really interesting online, what's the word I'm looking for? There's like a framework for it where it's all hyperlinked and it gives you direct links and lines to that sort of best practice stuff. So yeah, it's worthy of being cited like this, in my opinion. Anyway, so what we're going to look at is just a breakdown of that. I'm just going to give a couple of snapshots of the essences of what we need to apply to a digital planning for like a digital project in a youth work setting. And I suppose empowerment is one kind of agreed commonality across all youth work theory of individual groups and broader sort of social empowerment of young people, and how to kind of move from one to the other and the kind of and mark the progressions of this being the things that's open for any amount of theoretical considerations, or in terms of activities how that might be done. So within that, I suppose with digital youth work, what we're kind of concentrating on notionally first off, is just kind of making, giving young people the empowerment to be creators, digital creators, or to critically think about the and have an awareness about the media and the technologies they use. After that, I suppose essentially we want motivation being a big part of that, I suppose, in terms of learning more rather than just consuming stuff, and critically thinking about, be it apps and mods and tools that they're using even, and wondering how they can kind of create or put those together in a different way. That instantly feeds into a collaborative process potentially of, a shared sort of group environment where, if be it games or any sort of design, I suppose, or media-based projects, mostly the results are better when it derives from a team of people, because there is a number of different roles to be achieved, and different talent sets that can be understood or realized through that. So it doesn't, if we take a game environment, for example, something you've covered elsewhere, I'm sure, but the roles of, say, creative writing, character, action, voice, sort of, or and just devising characters and something more expressionist like that. Physical traditional art skills to be able to, handle color and shapes and to actually build these things. computer coding or computation to be able to build environments that this stuff could go into. And then all of that kind of coming together with, you know, a more refined sense of the same thing, of being able to go back over and give it another iteration to kind of clean up and polish up and really refine an idea. And that one requiring a lot of motivation and kind of resilience on the part of young people to achieve that to any completed aim. The beauty and the difference, I think most people agree that art or creative aspects of, or you know, of youth work in general, be it music or traditional arts or anything like that, is that you can see young people grow within it because they have the illustration of that growth, be it in the production of a song or the writing of a song or the performance of a song, or likewise if it's traditional art with the creation of an artifact or a story or something like that. And then, you know, the expressive nature of those acts is a kind of a firm illustration of, you know, the great benefits that go on with that type of engagement. That's, you know, it's kind of harder to measure in a lot of other forms of youth work, potentially. You know, you can see it interpersonally or just within people's personal development and their growth and stuff like that. The objective being the same, that it's all towards empowerment. And we just have the interesting line and the excitement of digital content and digital projects to allow that to emerge. So, as I said, I'm going to scoot over stuff that I know you have looked at elsewhere, but just to kind of fill in a few areas of just to see, again, like I said, just to be thinking in terms of creating digital content or young people with digital content in relation to these traditional models. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs there of, you know, basic needs, psychological needs, and self-fulfillment ones. And, you know, creative activities essentially, you know, would be deemed to be, you know, a pinnacle or a measure of that sort of achievement once all the other needs have been met. Essentially, in the ideal world, this is the case. And, you know, the traditional forms of youth work support do belong in that sort of creative environment as well. What's different here is, you know, where you might have experience of youth workers who have kind of creative skill sets or have an idea towards that. With digital youth work in particular, that's not necessarily the, you know, the be all, the be and end all of the situation. There's any number of technical skills, or just to be interested, or to be kind of a geek, or, you know, interested in technology or technological innovations, which most people are, or have devices and use them themselves. So it's an easier sort of transition, in my opinion, towards this sort of new take on digital media youth work, as it would be, say, for, you know, more traditional arts-based, or, you know, a youth worker with musical capabilities or whatever like that. So it's slightly different in one sense. Just, I kind of came across this and I thought I had to include it just to kind of an addendum to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which, you know, it's kind of glib in one sense, but in another one does kind of point to some kind of abstract certainties, I suppose, or things that are bigger parts of people's lives, in particular young people's lives, than we may know or notionally believe in relation to traditional youth work models. So I just had to kind of include that there. Just to look at the ladder of participation. Now, this is where it, to my mind, it becomes quite interesting in terms of where creative endeavors can come, and especially if there is seemingly a kind of a steep curve of learning, be it technical capabilities or confidence around that, and how much can be done before motivating a young person towards that. The worst end of the scale we want to look at is some sort of decoration or tokenism in terms of participating with these sort of technologies. If anything, that's probably where most of mainstream popular culture might be at, in terms of more consumptive models masquerading as like some sort of shared celebration or inclusion thing. What we really want to do is to get under the bonnet and to have people critically thinking, actively initiating and getting involved in a lot of these technologies that they use, in the very simplest sense, in a media study sense. Apart from that, it's a case of if young people can be included or can include themselves or can understand and comprehend the scope and spectrum of what a project might entail, for them to kind of initiate and direct that, share the decisions with adults, essentially, in taking the environment, the space, and the platform to excel in all these degrees. That's where we really want to be with participation. There's a few things that kind of help us, deliver that sort of support for young people. Mostly the obvious ones of that they are the earliest adopters of these technologies. They don't really have any sort of great concerns. There's a lot of kind of techno joy around it in terms of can-do attitudes, and the things they are aware of that they don't even know they're aware of because they do it so innately. These things are real qualifiers in terms of youth initiated and directed and projects or endeavors with young people. And then it's just a case of pushing that further to the shared decision making, and how they kind of can express all that or communicate all that to each other and to adults, and essentially arrive at a point where the creation of the work is the perfect illustration of all those sort of good things coming together. This is where we really want to arrive at with young people. So, to that end, we just need new words to put on this, I suppose. And one word which does kind of qualify in terms of, bypassing any sort of notions of tokenism or decoration with young people, is the concept of co-production, where, in general, youth work would not be working for or on young people, but it's more the term co-production is, captures the mutuality at the heart of that. And that's where we'd really want to be at. And it's a term that kind of just helps for something quite dynamic and, exciting to happen, and to be the concept of creation would kind of go with that co-production of it, in a traditional plastic sense of creating something and producing something, but also in the other aspects of this, which which the term means just of producing really significant life events for young people that help them to kind of grow and to achieve emancipation or whatever sort of understanding or resilience they might need for their young adult lives. So that term is the one that I think applies most closely to that. So again, this is all from, I'll have the references to the reflective practice tools and these papers, and are just resources actually, because they're really in-depth and very, very purposeful. So if we look at this critical reflective practice, which is something that a lot of youth workers would engage with in the traditional sense of youth work, in terms of their assessment and just informing their practice and evidence-based work. And we just look at, there's a cycle here where assessing situations, planning, doing, monitoring, evaluating, and reviewing is cyclical. And then following review, we add to an evidence base. In the context of the course, that will be towards a community of practice. And then also across from the planning and doing, we have drawing from evidence and informing values. So there's a few things feeding in and out of that cycle, but essentially the learning cycle is the vital one. So that can very easily and quickly be applied to youth work in a digital realm, or if we look at it through digital. For the purposes of this, though, I'll look at that in a bit more in depth in the next lecture, but I just want to kind of concentrate on the two things of designing for digital youth work, which is the planning and doing, So we have a few kind of angles that we can come at, our ways of kind of assessing what that might that entail. A lot of these are traditional in terms of youth work, things we know in terms of profiling a group, needs and potential assessment, just in terms of the who are the young people that we'd you want to engage in this activity. Evidence informed, like to describe how the program was chosen or developed, like again feeding from the needs and assessment. any research taken to that end, or consultation with peers or experts around that, just to see how that would kind of come about in the evidence-informed side. Then the planned outcomes. So if we look at, the impact will have on this plan will have on the lives of young people. And those can be kind of ranging from, just a direct engagement and retaining or maintaining an attendance, all the way through to the interpersonal skills of communicating, sharing sort of ideas, befriending other people, being challenged, all those sorts of issues, and right the way out to long-term ones of actually having a newer understanding of digital skills and competences and a creative skill set that will inform their lives and can possibly lead to very rich life opportunities. So we look at that next to the scope of it could be, and the beauty with digital media and digital projects is it can be project based, as in we're going to make a poster, we're going to make a scene for a movie, we're going to write a script for a film, we're going to do some sort of, a critical media review of a film or something like this, or we're going to record a video for a song, all these sorts of, just to take a few, or we're going to make a game. And just a case of, then it becomes an issue where that relates to the resources, and the resources are kind of important here of be it budget, staff, or, the technical capability within the youth centres that you have will kind of inform all those other sort of previous, in terms of the outcomes and how you can arrive at those outcomes really. So what we have is a traditional youth work, model for planning a group or, a session or a number of sessions around any sort of particular demographic of young people. And the only other impact on this is the technical kind of the equipment available, and then also combined with, the youth workers sort of know-how with that. So with those two things combined, we can begin to look at, doing the activities with that group. In terms of digital media and, computer-based work or technological-based work, there will be a mix of individual and group work entailed, which just needs a bit of management in terms of, setting objectives, communicating kind of broader ideas to a group, and then allowing enough room for people to kind of go off and have their own sort of inquiry, or to break out into a group again and just kind of discuss where they're coming from. So it's quite a flexible sort of arrangement that you need to have there. The best way, as this is just kind of a snapshot. This is not anyway sort of rigid or certain and applies anywhere or everywhere whatsoever. This is just my kind of take on this, and we'll see it'll be bespoke to every sort of project that you engage in, or the different demographics of young people might mean that the interpersonal or personal development stuff is the achievement, or just kind of you might be want to arrive at discussing violence in video games and violence in media, and that's the achievement of it. So, a lot of this stuff can kind of be rearranged in a lot of ways. I'm going to take it that we want to make and we want to achieve a group project essentially, and that's where we want to arrive at. And even at that, this is still kind of just a snapshot of what can be done. I think that the second sessions, or the brainstorming sessions, the second in the list here, are the brainstorming sessions that refine expressions, encourage ownership, and mostly the comprehension of the scale and size of what can be achieved and how it can be achieved is a vital one to have, and to have many of them essentially, because that's where all the really good challenges, critical thinking can come around. Mostly the ownership and the kind of the shared responsibility towards the work and knowing what it's going to achieve can all build that sort of expression, the friendships or the camaraderie, whatever is needed to achieve that. And mostly the comprehension of, the motivations and what it's going to take to pull it off. And then within that, it can be a case of just timetabling essentially with them of what can be done and how long it should take. this is where it kind of becomes more of a technical pursuit for a youth worker rather than a creative one. Because if you know all the answers to those questions straight away, well, then it's probably not something that young people would want to embark on straight away, because it kind of eats into the excitement of it. There should be an apprehension and an exciting energy with that apprehension of, we don't know exactly how we're going to achieve that. And this is where the confidence of the youth worker is vital and most important to achieve that end goal, because we understand the parameters, we know the rules, we know enough of the context of how this might come around to deliver the programs, but we don't have all the answers. And this is where this brainstorm sessions and essentially planning sessions should iron out a lot of those things, you know. Also to kind of, you know, there's another side of this, which is being creative with the technical capabilities of a youth centre or not, you know. And that to share that sort of, if it's a problem in terms of the resources that might be available with young people, again, there's room there to be quite sort of creative and innovative in terms of using what you have to achieve it. For example, you mightn't have a camera or a high, you know, a kind of a real quality camera to shoot a film on or movie on, and then, you know, there might be a phone that's available that could be used. And the phone in and of itself technically will do the job. But to go back into the brainstorm with that and to think, okay, how can you film with a phone? Can you film more discreetly? Are there any available effects or apps that are available for that particular model of a phone that you can enhance it to make it look more aesthetically pleasing? Whatever, there's a whole other set of creative solutions that come with the creative problems. And to view those two things as inseparable, I think, is a vital part. And it's an exciting one to give to young people as well. Of it arrives with that can-do attitude that everything that looks like a problem can instantly be turned into like another creative tool. So yeah, the materials shouldn't be the killer of anything like that. And a discussion much with the planning of what is available, how can it be used. If it is a numbers-based issue, to either schedule or timetable access to particular computers, if a number of people want to do a set number of tasks. These sorts of things just, again, lead into the comprehension of the whole project and the shared ownership and responsibility that goes with that. The techno fear versus techno joy, I just wanted to include there, mostly to have the can-do attitude towards that, as we spoke about earlier with resourcing, but also to encourage the experimentation, especially the initial stage when young people, you know, become overwhelmed essentially and excited with a new technology that they're at to getting the hang of, or they're at to being exposed to. And that can be really rewarding for young people to actually play with it, almost like a game, be it if it's an app or a kind of photo editing software, anything like that, just even to get into key commands and to know how a mouse and a keyboard operate, things that are sadly diminishing next to, like, you know, touch screens as well. So all that sort of stuff is like an enhanced skill set, and it's quite deceptive in one way to think that there's not much in that, but it's actually can be a really big deal to allow them to experiment. The brute force design is it's, you know, a concept that comes to you know, not being kind of cautious or step by step with sort of different iterations, or to know all the answers before you begin. The reality is that the technology is so robust and resilient that it's quite difficult to break it or to make it crash or to do anything like that. Again, these are things that really encourage an exciting first interaction with them and to be able to experiment with it. And again, you know, nice kind of results can arrive out of such a way of designing a project as well. So brute force design is a really interesting kind of concept in that, and mostly even to apply to yourselves as youth workers who are trying to, you know, say yes, we can do this to young people, and then have a short window to go off and research that and prepare or plan that sort of activity, where brute force will allow you kind of, if it's a case of engaging with the YouTube tutorials, forums, or anything like that, to find references, people who built reference files, mods or different apps that you can use to kind of drop into your programs, you know, or different toolkits. All those things will help you kind of speed it along and essentially iterate your lesson plan as much as young people can do the same through learning the technology for the first time. So within all that is the balance, which is the same one in terms of, you know, optimize engaged young people in youth work, is the reward versus the challenge of it, you know, and that's kind of like a gamified aspect to the environment as well. And I think that to be part of that, to be a player in that, to not have all the answers to that, or to set rigid boundaries or rules of what can and cannot be done, to include yourself as a youth worker in that scenario allows for more exciting sort of experiences, and allows for it to be much more of a dynamic energy in any particular group, and to maintain that over a longer period of time. And then also to kind of break out of that and to, you know, allow some downtime for what is essentially intellectual pursuits of young people learning new apps and technologies as well. So there's a balance to be struck there. And it's once you get that right, then you're into flow. So, and another thing is encouraging the sharing of learned skills and expression. So again, this is like you've gone from individual to group work, mostly to include the most introverted or, you know, notionally antisocial sort of young people in particular in a group, where they have, you know, just quieter manners and demeanors, and there's room for that sort of expression now, a quieter expression, and allowing people to kind of work alone by themselves and then warm to a group or join in like that is a really interesting dynamic to lead to a greater inclusivity within group sessions like that, and also to champion, you know, young people who have the aptitude and the ability and the passion to sit there and work away on a computer for hours on end rather than being out on sports pitches or something like this. So there's room there again to kind of really encourage that, and to bring that back to share the experience or the fruits of their labor, or essentially of what they've created with each other, is an enormously valuable resource to the other young people, and is a level of learning that, you know, youth workers can't actually arrive at themselves with young people. There's nothing like seeing young people share skills amongst themselves, because they do it super fast and in a really kind of quiet way. And that's something that's always to be encouraged, because it's learned then, and then it's like a shared thing, and you're building this sort of culture of sharing different experiences and lean towards a support and, you know, a different type of comprehension and expression of what they're doing. Within all that, there's room, and there should be room, for fast iterations of things. So just if you have a 40-minute session, set an objective earlier, what needs to be achieved within that session, and by the end of it, have a version of that, and to have everyone look at that and prepare and showcase their work next to that, and to critically kind of think and engage with the positives and negatives of what they've done, where they found it hard, where they didn't find it hard, and share those experiences with each other. But to have those firm examples and to keep the dynamism up before you go on to a next session is a really vital way to have them skip out the door and know that they're going to come in excited about learning more, and to think about what they've done in the interim. Yeah, and overall they're just assessing that sort of work, as I've said, and agreeing on the next lesson plan, because, you know, there will be naturally changes of things that were surprises and emerged and kind of became central now, or have an agreement if this is a vital part of it and a central part of it or not, next to you know, things that are taking a lot longer than we thought. I might need a youth worker to kind of step away within the week before the next session, or within the days or whatever, to kind of troubleshoot that a little bit, or to come up with different solutions to that, and to keep all that as a creative shared experience with a shared sort of set of problems, and to send them away with those sorts of puzzles in their head that they need to solve amongst each other. Or, you know, essentially that's their homework that they come away with like that. All of these things will lead to like a really fruitful, dynamic, engaged sort of situation. Just to point out again that the actual, you know, the upfront skill set of a youth worker in that environment is pretty, you know, remote compared to what is notionally thought is needed for that. You know, you need the confidence to say yes, and I can do this, and we will do this to young people. You need to be able to turn on the computer, access the internet, and find the answers. So it's not a case of looking for, you know, having to watch videos the last 60 minutes or an hour to find it. It's just learning what the answer is. If it's, how do I cut out an image from a background and keep it transparent, and what file format do I need to keep it in? It's short, concise sentences of what you need to do. and just understanding that and thinking through the same way as we'd have young people critically think about, you know, that sort of practice. These are things that are going to deliver a more exciting package and actually make the job a lot easier, and just return it essentially to more traditional forms of youth work, of just supporting young people to kind of, you know, empower themselves and grow with that. So essentially that's it. I'm going to wind it up there. The next lecture will be on best practice youth work processes, where I'll just delve down a little bit into, you know, those sorts of those reflective practice models, and just see where it can make, because it is a more traditional set next to digital youth work. So we need to look at that a little bit further. And then in just following this, then there'll be the first step of the practical, which will be me applying a few of these sorts of ideas and can-do approaches to finding free tools online to start creating, and show you doing some demonstrations and leaving some materials for that end. Okay, see you in the next video. All right, bye.